Okay, so we last left off and I was telling y'all, for my last story time, I was telling y'all about how I had a baby when I was 14. And some of y'all saw the title of this video and y'all was like, really? You had another baby while you were still a teenager? Same thing the nurses said when they saw me in that hospital 2 years later. But we gonna back up, okay? We gonna back up because it's story time. So, gave birth to my daughter at 14 and then, you know, went through the whole like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? I haven't slept in forever, ever. And then not too long after, and I'm gonna back up to give you a little bit of context here for what happens later. So not too long after I had my daughter, I was rushed to the hospital in like super severe pain, like really bad. I called the ambulance, and you know, if you call an ambulance in the hood, like you hurting. So called the ambulance, and it turns out my appendix had ruptured, and they only found that out after they went in. So I went to the hospital, and mind you, I got a whole baby at home, but I'm not even legally old enough to consent to my own health care. So they spent time like trying to find my mother, and they couldn't find her, and eventually they were able to contact my grandmother, and she gave them permission to go in and do exploratory surgery. So they go in with a camera to look around and see what's going on. They get in there and they realize my appendix has ruptured. So then they cut me open more and clean out like all the poison or whatever, because I guess when your appendix ruptures, like it's poisonous. They clean everything up, and then they tell me that like there's a lot of scar tissue, and like my insides were like messed up. So, you know, at some point, I'm not sure if it was exactly then or not too long after, but at some point they tell me that like my likelihood of conceiving another child is like really slim. At the time, I'm like, dude, I don't care. I just had a baby. Like, I ain't thinking about having no more babies, so whatever. So going about my life, my stupid teenage, you just had a whole baby. Like, don't you know that condoms are a thing now? Apparently I didn't life. And I'm just, you know, living my life like it's golden. Fast forward a little bit of time. I start feeling like my body is just different. Like I just start feeling weird. And so I go to my boyfriend at the time and I'm like, hey, I think I'm pregnant. And he's like, oh, did you miss your period? And I was like, no. And he's like, why do you think you're pregnant? And I'm like, I don't have on any primer. And I'm like, cause I think I'm pregnant. And he's like, yeah, okay. Weird, you're not pregnant. And so I was like, all right, you know, he kind of makes sense. Like if I haven't missed a period, why would I think I was pregnant? And I really couldn't even explain it. I just knew that like something was different. So I'm like, whatever. I go back to just living my life because what he said was logical. A little while later, like I'm having some sensitivity in my breast, and I'm just like, okay, I'm just feeling like weird. So I go to the doctor and I take a pregnancy test, and they're like, yeah, nope, you're not pregnant. And so I'm like, okay, cool. Go back home, gone about my business, and I'm just still feeling like super weird, right? Like, and it's the kind of weird where it's just like you just know something is different about your body even if you can't pinpoint it. So go to the doctor. They're like, yeah, nah, sis. At some point, I'm telling the guy that I'm with, who is the father of my first child, I'm steady telling him that like I think I'm pregnant. And then he's like, look, you just want to be pregnant or something because you're having a period. The doctor said you're not pregnant. Like, why do you keep talking about this pregnant thing? All this sounds really reasonable on his part, right? Like, doctor said no, you're still having a period. Still, I know my body. So I kind of drop it with like other people, but I don't really drop it with myself. I don't know how many times I went back to the doctor, but it was a few. Like I went back to the doctor a few times, and each time I went back, they told me that I was not pregnant again. So at some point I started wondering, like, maybe you do just want to be pregnant. Like maybe this is all in your head. Like And then I'm like, well, why would you do that? Like, you don't actually, like, you don't want another baby right now. Like, why would you make yourself pregnant if you're not actually pregnant? These are all very reasonable questions that I'm asking myself as I'm trying to figure out why I think I'm pregnant, when the doctors have said I'm not pregnant, when my ex is telling me that clearly it must be all in my head. So I dropped the subject. One day, I am with my then boyfriend, same person, and we all watching TV in the living room with his family. And we're sitting there watching television, and I feel something move in my stomach. Now, I've been pregnant before. I know what it feels like to have a baby move in your stomach. I know that what I am feeling is a baby moving in my stomach. However, I cannot say to this room of people, hey, I feel a baby moving in my stomach. And that room of people not say, sis, we're gonna go ahead and get you checked out in one of the facilities, because clearly something ain't right. So I don't say anything. I just sit there watching a movie with the family, thinking to myself, there's a baby moving in my belly. A little bit after that, I noticed that I have milk coming in. Mind you, my daughter, so I never really didn't have milk from the time that I was pregnant with my daughter. So the time that I was pregnant with my daughter and my milk came in, like, my milk would come and go throughout that entire period. So this is like almost, this is like a year and something later. I would still basically have situations where I would just have milk coming out of my breast. So that didn't really like cause any red flags or anything like that for me, because that was a thing that just happened. But while the milk coming out of my breast was like no reason for me to be alarmed, no reason for me to be concerned, feeling a baby move inside of me was. But again, like, at this point, the doctor done told me 50-11 times, my boyfriend done told me 50-11 times that I'm crazy. So I'm like, okay. Fast forward a little bit more, and I just started having like extreme fatigue. Like, I was just tired all the time. Like, no matter what I did, I was tired. Like, I would sweep the floor and then I would like need to take a whole nap. I would wash dishes and I would be exhausted. I've always been like super anemic, so I was like, my iron must be like really low. I'm gonna go to the doctor and see what they say. So I go to the doctor for them to check my iron and get some iron pills. And I'm in there and I was like, yeah, my iron must be really low. And the nurse is like, this is before anything has happened. She was like, oh yeah, your iron might be low, but what's wrong with you is you're pregnant. And I'm like, what? Mind you, I thought I was pregnant all them times before in these months leading up to it, but everything kept coming back saying I wasn't. And so I'm thinking like, first of all, how do you know this, sis? But apparently she knew something, because what she did this time was take a blood test. Up until this point, all the tests I was taking were urine tests, and all of those urine tests were coming back to say that I was not pregnant. She took a blood test. Turns out I'm pregnant. And yes, I had indeed felt a baby moving inside of me. So by this point, I'm about 5 whole months pregnant before a blood test comes back positive to say that I am in fact pregnant. So, wasn't all in my head. I wasn't imagining it. It wasn't the case that I simply wanted to be pregnant. It was the case that for whatever reason, my body, it just wasn't registering on a regular urine test. Like, it needed to be a blood test. So she runs the test comes back, bada boom, bada bing. I am definitely pregnant. So yeah, so when the test comes back, like, I'm slightly feeling vindicated, right? Because I've been telling this man that I am pregnant, and this man been telling me that I am crazy. And by man, I mean my then, like, what was I, 16? So No, I was 17. I was 17 then? No, I was 16 then. So he's 18, right? So I'm telling my then 18-year-old boyfriend that I'm pregnant. He telling me I'm crazy. Finally, there's something that says I am indeed not crazy. That elation was short-lived because immediately after I realized, oh crap, I'm having another baby. Now comes the part where I have to tell people. But I'm not gonna tell people. Like, I'm not about to tell people. I know I just had a baby about, a year and a half ago. But I'm gonna do it again because clearly I learned something. So I decided I'm not gonna tell anybody. But at the time, I am living with him and his family. So I'm living with my daughter's father and his parents, right? But I don't want to tell anybody I'm pregnant. So I start wearing like large sweatshirts and bigger clothes. Because lo and behold, as soon as I like find out I'm pregnant, then like I start showing that I'm pregnant. Okay. So I start wearing big clothes. We come to an event for his grandparents. So his grandparents, my daughter's great grandparents, were having a celebration for their wedding anniversary. And it was like one of the big wedding anniversaries. They were married for a really long time. So it was one of those like, milestone anniversaries that they were celebrating. And it was a whole big to-do. And everybody was going to wear, they were all going to wear like cream or something. And so his mother decided to be nice, and she actually went out and bought me a dress to wear to this event. Like, okay, how, that was nice to make me feel included and whatnot, and to go buy a dress. So she goes and purchases a dress, and all these powders. She goes and buys me a dress, and it is a form-fitting, like ankle length, like neck to ankle, was covered, but it was super form-fitting, right? Now what I'm supposed to do with this form-fitting dress, and I'm sitting here hiding the whole belly up under sweatshirts. What I'm supposed to do, Craig? What I'm supposed to do? So, I gotta wear the dress. I can't be like, no, I can't wear this dress that you went and bought for me because, right? What am I gonna say? So, I don't say anything. I'm like, fine, I'll just wear the dress. At this point, I've told him, that the doctor said I'm pregnant, so he knows. We just ain't told nobody else. So I didn't tell him. So I decided I'm gonna wear the dress, and I'm just gonna try to hold my stomach in. That's what I decided I was gonna do. I decided I was just gonna try to hold my stomach in. So there was a part of the ceremony where it was called like give them their flowers. And so all of the grandchildren and great grandchildren were going to approach their grandparents, great grands, and give them, oh Lord, I'm trying to sift this powder back down in here, and give them some flowers. My daughter was at the time like almost 2, and so she can walk, but like she needs to be escorted over to her grandparents. I'm gonna do the job of escorting her. Now mind you, this whole time I'm at the gathering, I am up until this point, I had, my grandmother had given me a Dooney and Burke purse, and it was like one of the large drawstring ones. So it was like, it stood up at least about this high. And so I had the purse in front of me, like for the whole event. I've just got this purse sitting in front of my body. So I'm like, yeah, I'll just, keep this purse in front of me. So somewhere there exists a film of me walking my daughter over to her great grandparents with a purse in front of me, and I'm like stooped over, leaned over, trying to hide a whole belly. Y'all, I am so sure that every auntie, every grand aunt, every sister, cousin, whoever in that room knew I was pregnant, okay? They probably did. Just didn't say nothing to save me, you know, some face. Because clearly, when I say clearly, like, you see my frame. Like, I was even smaller then. Like, I couldn't have been more than 90 pounds wearing Timberland boots back then. So, like, what was I really hiding? I don't know. But for whatever reason, either no one actually noticed, or they were just waiting on me to say what clearly everybody knew. So, you know, all of that's going on. Eventually I tell everybody, because at some point it just becomes like clearly obvious that I am pregnant. And, you know, I don't really remember like the specifics of the responses. Like, I'm pretty sure that people, you know, probably was shaking their heads and clicking their tongues, just because here I was about to have another baby, you know, 2 years after having the first one. And I am still a teenager with no, you know, reasonable and secure means of taking care of myself. Fast forward a little more, and I like just start having issues with the pregnancy. I keep going into like preterm labor. For whatever reason, I kept contracting. My appetite wasn't really that great. I definitely did not gain nearly as much weight with the second pregnancy as I did with the first. Like with my daughter, I was about 90 pounds when I got pregnant, and at the end of that pregnancy, I was 154 pounds. So I gained over 60 pounds. I'm getting powder everywhere. So I gained over 60 pounds with the pregnancy with my daughter. And with my son, I started I started gaining, but then I started losing weight. And I was going into labor like all the time. I subsequently kept going into labor so much that they eventually hospitalized me. So they put me in the hospital, and they put me on some medication that was designed to like just stop my muscles, to relax my muscles. So to relax the muscles such that I guess like they couldn't contract. So I'm in the hospital on this medicine that essentially just has my body like paralyzed, like I'm just lying there. This is about, I'm about 7 months pregnant at this point. So I'm just there and kind of just there. My daughter, meanwhile, is home with her grandparents, and her father, who, you know, he lives with the grandparents, as I said. And I'm missing my baby. Like, I'm missing my baby like nobody's business. And they wouldn't let her come into the hospital to see. After I had been there for some weeks, I checked myself out against medical advice. And I go home, and let me tell y'all, this is how reckless I was, okay? I checked myself out of the hospital in the middle of like doctors trying to stop preterm labor. I checked myself out of the hospital. I get on a bus and I go home, and then I walk from the bus stop from Halsted to Princeton. Did he live on Princeton? Or was it Stewart? Parnell. Let me tell you, I've been to many places. So I walk from Halsted to Parnell. If you're from Chicago, you don't know the reference. If you're from Chicago, you know Halsted to Parnell with a whole big old preterm pregnant belly. Not the best decision. So I did it, and get home and find my baby daddy in bed with somebody else. But that's a whole nother story time for y'all. We're not gonna get off into the details. What you need to know is that it caused such a ruckus that I immediately went back into labor and had to go right back to the hospital. So I go to the hospital, and the nurses at this point, they kind of sort of know me. They know me from like my daughter, and they know me from this go round. And so I go back, and she literally, one of the nurses says to me, "What'd he do?" As soon as I get back. They know. So get back and sit my happy-go-lucky self down somewhere to like just sit down. Finally, they released me. Like, eventually, they just released me and let me go home. After I got past enough time for them to consider like that, okay, you can have the baby now and it will be safe for the baby. So I'm guessing I was like maybe like 36 weeks by the time they let me go. So I go home, and then when it's time for the baby to come, baby decided the baby ain't coming. Baby gonna chill. Like, now he good. He was steadily trying to come the whole time I needed him not to come. And then when it was time for him to come, he was like, nah, I'm good. I'ma chill. So eventually, the child who doctors had to like paralyze my body to prevent him from getting here, they subsequently had to induce my labor to get him here. So I go back into the hospital to have my labor induced, and because I'd had the first baby with no pain medication and absolutely no problems, like very little pain, I was like, I'm gonna do it that way again. Like, I'm good. I don't need no drugs. Epidural who? Girl, I'm straight. Let me tell you something. Every baby ain't the same. Every labor ain't the same, and every labor pain ain't the same. Now, I was in labor with my daughter for 42 hours. No pain. I was in labor with my first son for 8 hours. And when I tell you it hurt, listen. It hurt. So 8 hours in labor with my son. My mother was there this go round. So my mom was there. I ended up not going back to the hospital where I had my daughter. I ended up at a different hospital. I don't even remember like the details of why. It very likely has something to do with the fact that I was like on Medicaid at the time or something. I don't know. But I go to a different hospital, and I'm in the hospital, and it's a very different experience from the first, right? Like, I ain't got no midwife surrounding me. I am not in my own room. In fact, I'm in a room with other women in labor that are just like cycling out. So like, women are coming and they're delivering, you know, once they go, they're in the room with me laboring, and we have like a curtain up. And then when it's time for them to deliver, they wheel them down to another place. At the time, I don't know where. I just know that women disappear. I hear screams, and then they don't come back anymore. That's the setup, right? You're in there, you're in labor, women come, then they leave, they scream, and you don't hear from them again. That sounds really inviting. So eventually, my time comes. I finally, you know, am close enough to delivery or whatever that they allow me to go. I'm wheeled into this like really, I guess, sterile room, but it was like, it was really cold. I mean, I'm always cold anyway, but like the space just felt like super duper cold. So super cold. My mom's in there, and I'm telling the doctor, I'm like, the baby is like there, like he's there. And they're like, no. And I'm like, no, like I can feel that he should be coming out. And they're just not listening to me, right? Like, I'm telling them that the baby, and in my, you know, 16-year-old, was 16? No, this was 2 weeks after my 17th birthday. In my 17-year-old lingo, what I'm trying to tell them is that the baby is stuck in my pelvis. And what they are doing is ignoring me. And so eventually somebody realizes what I'm saying, and the doctor goes in with his hand, goes in like under my baby's head and pulls the head up and pulls the baby out. It hurt. Like, all of that hurt. Pulls the baby out, puts my son on top of me, and the first thing I'm looking at is like the shape of my son's head, because what was going on was when they had me pushing, he was stuck. And I guess it was like having an impact on his head, because he had probably been in that position for quite some time. And so I'm pushing and I'm telling them, like, there's a reason, like, nothing is happening, and they didn't listen to me forever. And that's a whole nother, like, we could get into a whole nother story about doctors not listening to Black women in labor. And only now do I realize, like, the extent of that and what that could have meant for me. So they do that, put the baby on me, and like I said, I was like, oh Lord, his head. My mother, Black mother that she is, I think one of the first things she said was like, we can shape his head, we can shape his head. Because it was like a cone. His head was like straight up shaped like a cone, because of the pressure of the position that he was in. So all that's going on, bada boom, bada bing. I am now the 17-year-old mother of two babies. I still don't have a job. Like, what was I doing? Well, I was making money some kind of way. I don't know about statute of limitations, so we're gonna be quiet. So 17-year-old mother of two babies, and at this point, like, you know, the stares I'm getting on the street are even more pronounced because, you know, I mean, look at me now. Like, you can't tell that I'm the mother of a 25-year-old, right? And so you're definitely looking at me 25 years ago wouldn't have been, or 22 years ago. Look, I ain't got time for the math. 20-something years ago, you wouldn't have been looking at me thinking there's any way I should be walking down the street with two babies, one holding hand and the other on my hip. So the stares definitely increased. People looking at me like, you know, I got the peanut butter all over my face. So I am now, at this point, the mother of two babies. And I'm 17 years old. And, you know, you're probably trying to figure out, sis, how did we get from having a baby at 14 to having a baby at 17 to where you are now? It's gonna take a whole lot of story times to get us there, but we gonna get there. We shall get there through a whole lot more story times. So yeah, like, at the end of the day, you know, I definitely have had my share of experiences. All of them have certainly shaped who I am, and the work that I do, and the work that I'm interested in, and the way that I live my life, and the way that I, you know, am working to heal and process and all of those sorts of things. My son did luck up in the sense that at least he didn't have to deal with no funny name business. So even though his father wasn't there when I gave birth, actually, I was mad at him. So I don't know how it turned out that I still ended up naming the baby after him. While I did name him Junior, his name was absolutely derived off of like his father's name. So go figure. Well, at least I didn't have to rely on a sheet this time. So I took my baby home. I ain't really still had no stuff for the baby or nothing, because keep in mind, I'm still kind of poor. I remember getting things, you know, from people again. People were being like super helpful, because that's just the nature of what folks did and what folks do. I did some similar living with like folks as I needed to. Of course, it's that much harder when you need to stay with people and you have two babies compared to like when you have one baby, and certainly compared to when you have no babies. But we made it through. We made it through that time period. You know, we live our lives, the very, very complicated life that leads us up until this point. But as I said, would take quite a few more story times to get us there. We'll get there slowly, or y'all will just have to wait for it in the book. Anyway, as I said, I'll be spilling all my guts in these videos, so the very least y'all could do is like it and share it. You know how the algorithms work. Like the video, share the video, all that other good stuff. In the meantime, I'll think about what the next story time is. I'm thinking the next story time might be about, you know what? I'm not even gonna guess right now. Y'all have to stay tuned to see what the next story time is. So that is the story of how I had 2 babies before my 18th birthday. And I'm sure it tells you a little bit about who I am, why I advocate for the many causes that I advocate for, and why I, am always quick to hold place and to hold space and to hold love for not just young Black girls, but certainly pregnant and parenting Black teens as well, because, the personal is very much the political. So I hope that y'all will join me for the next story time. Take care.